Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Isaias Fernandez Anaerobic Wash Process Honduras from Onyx Coffee Lab. And there's the bag right there. And Onyx, based out of Bentonville, Arkansas. And this coffee right here was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video, where it did finish 4th place out of 5 Onyx coffees on that day. And if you watched that video, then you'll see that we were able to pick out this coffee because it had a very distinct sort of cranberry taste to it. And I want to emphasize distinct because it was unique compared to a lot of the other cranberry experiences I've had from coffees, which tend to be a little bit more on the savory, more tart side, but this one was just kind of a more clean cranberry to the cup of coffee. So even though I'm not the biggest fan of cranberry, it left a pretty positive first impression on me, as I found the coffee to be pretty unique relative to a lot of other coffees I've had. So it's going to be interesting to see how long they might be able to replicate that, as long as I'd be able to replicate it. This right here is day 12 of this coffee. And again, Onyx does have brew guides for all of their coffees on their YouTube channel. So follow the brew guide, which was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Brewed it through the V60, but I like this coffee a lot more through the Chemex, so I just wanted to note that real quick. This is a light medium American for the roast profile, and let's start discussing this coffee. So day 6, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and again, it left a pretty positive first impression because of just how clear the cranberry was. And the most cranberry forward cup of coffee I had ever experienced, and I really appreciated that because just having a cup of coffee that's unique and sets itself apart from so many other cups of coffee, that's always going to leave a positive first impression, even if it's not necessarily the flavor that I'm enjoying the most. So I really liked it on day 6. Day 7 went back and ran it through the V60, and this is kind of important because the coffee is essentially 2 different coffees based off of these brew methods. So as run through the V60, it very much reminded me of a lot of Kenyan coffees. It had a lot of savoriness to it, especially the savory red berries to the cup of coffee, and I would just say it was pretty intense and lasting overall. So whereas brewed through the Chemex, it kind of finishes off pretty clean and clear. Brewed through the V60, you're getting a slightly more murky profile with a little bit more of the savoriness that was coming from the cup. Day 10, again, strong Kenyan-like characteristics to the cup of coffee, and there was a slight bit of savoriness, heavy cranberry of course. The cranberry was definitely present no matter how you brewed this coffee, and slight bit of dark honey in the cup as well. And one other thing I did want to touch on was there was a nice bit of sugar sweetness in the cup of coffee. No matter how it was brewed, the sugar sweetness in the cup of coffee was great, so that was one part of this coffee I really did enjoy. On the slightly clearer side of things, especially considering it was an anaerobic coffee, and it was pretty decent overall. And it was on this day I kind of checked something because that Blind Tiger coffee was another Isaias Fernandez, anaerobic washed Isaias Fernandez, and I wanted to find out what the variety was of that coffee because these two coffees are as polar opposites as possible for coffees. And I couldn't find out what the variety was from that coffee, but when I went to look what the variety was for this coffee, I assumed maybe they'd planted an SL28 and SL34, some kind of traditional Kenyan variety, and that's why it was kind of savory. But no, I was really surprised. It's a Paranima, which is a coffee weed. It's a coffee variety we'd reviewed earlier this year from Passenger, which was a very strange cup of coffee overall. And that kind of makes a lot more sense, as this coffee as a whole was a little different, strange, especially based off the way you were brewing it. So that was very much worth noting. And then on day 11, ran it back through the V60, correction back through the Chemex, and really enjoyed it through the Chemex because you just get this really clean base to the cup of coffee, especially the clean cranberries, and there was a lot more to it. I really like the level of sweetness that comes from both of these brew methods, but I like the level of sweetness that comes from the Chemex a little bit more than I do from the V60. And even then I was getting a lot more of that honey that they have listed on here, even a slight bit of a brown candy, which is unfortunate because when we look at the tasting wheel, you'll see that that wasn't necessarily there with the V60. So let's go ahead and put up that tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. Right, and this tasting wheel was made on day 10 with the V60, so that's why it would look pretty different actually if I did make it with the Chemex. And the thing I want to discuss the most on that specifically is the cleanliness, because I think this is a pretty clean cup of coffee. It's very interesting that they have a wine flavor profile listed on here because I wasn't experiencing much, if any, sort of booziness from this cup of coffee, which is strange again because the Las Lajas was a coffee they said wasn't boozy, but it was very boozy for me, so very interesting. But the cleanliness is at a level 3, and I think brewed through the Chemex, you could even push that up to a level 4 because I really like the cleanliness of this cup of coffee when brewed through the Chemex, and the caramel, which is at a level 1, almost non-existent through the V60, I get a lot more. Specifically, this brown candy and the honey that they have listed on here would even be willing to push that up to a level 3. But of course, the thing we must discuss the most is that berry at a level 5, as the cranberries were distinct and clear no matter how you're brewing this cup of coffee. So there were 2 different kinds of cranberries, a more tart, savory cranberry when brewed through the V60, and a more clean and crisp cranberry when brewed through the Chemex. Regardless, level 5 definitely justified. Body on the higher side of things, definitely a little bit of finish. The sweetness at a level 4, I think it's got an excellent amount of sweetness to it. I don't think it's overbearing, and I don't think it's underwhelming. I think the sweetness is at a great level for this. Acidity a little higher at level 3. And then the citrus fruit, which when charted was at a level 4, and I don't know if it could have been the priming effect when I found out I was drinking a Paranema, but it did remind me a lot of the kind of unripened pineapple that I was experiencing from the passenger coffee. I started tasting that in this coffee, as well as a lot more of the melon flavors too. So there was a lot in this cup of coffee. I feel like it's a little bit more of a complex cup of coffee, and you can pick out quite a bit more from this cup of coffee, whereas the Lost Law House was overbearing with the red raspberry wine. I feel like this one does provide a very straightforward cranberry, but at the same time, it's a little bit easier, given how clean it is, to pick out a lot of the other components that come from this cup of coffee. All right, so overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like I've been talking about this coffee pretty fondly, as it wasn't something that I necessarily expected I was going to enjoy as much as I did, but I did enjoy this cup of coffee. It's not my favorite cup of coffee by any means, as it's not a flavor profile that I typically tend to enjoy, but I can appreciate a cup of coffee when it does have a lot of unique characteristics to it, and this one definitely had a lot of unique characteristics to it. I thought that this one was a more fun and complex cup of coffee, so it was something that diving a little bit further into it, experimenting with this cup of coffee a little bit more, would have been quite a bit of fun. And this just does go to show that there are some coffees from Onyx that inspired me to like them as much as I did. Once upon a time, I mean, I was a massive fan of Onyx, and this is a great example of why I was, because these coffees can be pretty fun to work with. So the type of person I would suggest this coffee to, well, keep in mind that very clear red berry, but there are a lot of people I can suggest this coffee to, because you can like several different kinds of coffee, and you're going to be able to get it in this coffee. So if you do like something that's a little bit more clean in those red berries, then you can get this coffee when brewed through the Chemex. And if you do like something that's a little bit more Kenyan-like, but is just a little bit unique in its own Kenyan sense, then this is a great fit for you as well, because it does have that savory and it does have those red berries as well. So a lot of people I find this coffee to be a pretty good fit for, and I just enjoyed this one significantly more than the Lost Loss, and I would say it was probably my either third or second favorite coffee from the Onyx coffees that I did purchase. So I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Isaias Fernandez Anaerobic Wash Process Honduras from Onyx Coffee Lab. Thank you for watching.